They don't scream. They don't hit. They don't even raise their voice. They just look at you with sad eyes and say, "I've been hurt before." And something in you softens. You feel called to help, to stay, to heal. But weeks pass, months, maybe years, and suddenly, you feel like a ghost inside your own life. You're always tired, always overthinking, always emotionally on. But here's the worst part. You blame yourself. You think you're the one changing. You don't realize you're being fed on. This isn't about drama or abuse. It's about something far more dangerous, something that feels like love, but leaves you empty. This is the psychic vampire, the quiet controller, the soft devourer. And unless you see the pattern, you'll confuse compassion with captivity. Carl Jung warned us, when the unconscious drives a relationship, identity dissolves. You become someone else's emotional host. You stop dreaming, stop feeling light, and the scariest part? You call it loyalty. In this video, you'll uncover the truth behind guilt-based relationships, how emotional exhaustion hides in plain sight, and why setting boundaries can feel like betrayal, even when it's the only way to survive. You'll finally understand what's been draining you, and how to take your life back without shame, guilt, or cruelty. So, if you've ever felt like you're giving everything and getting nothing back, stay with me, because what you're about to hear might explain everything you were never able to put into words. It doesn't always begin with drama. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, a soft voice, a sad story, a pair of eyes that say, "I've been hurt before." And that's exactly how the most dangerous type of emotional control enters your life, quietly. Not with demands, but with need. Not with rage, but with helplessness. They don't grab you. They lean on you. And you, kind, open, empathic, offer your shoulder without hesitation. But what starts as compassion soon turns into fatigue. You find yourself constantly tired, drained, and vaguely anxious. And you can't quite explain why. That's because you're not just offering support. You're being fed on. By what Jung would call a psychic merger, what we now call a psychic vampire. This person doesn't scream, control, or threaten. They suffer. They struggle. They need you, badly. And slowly, you start giving up parts of yourself in the name of love. You answer texts at 2 a.m. You cancel plans just in case they need you. You stop saying what you think because it might trigger something. They're never okay. There's always something wrong. And you keep showing up, hoping they'll get better. But they don't. Because they don't want to get stronger. They want someone to carry them. This is the illusion. They appear sensitive and fragile. But beneath it lies an unconscious dynamic of control. Your time, energy, and attention become fuel. In Jungian psychology, this is called unconscious symbiosis. It happens when two psyches fuse, and one slowly loses shape inside the other. But this isn't happening by accident. It's happening because the other person has never learned to process their pain, so they outsource it. To you, not through force, but through softness, through silence, through sorrow. And you, because you've been conditioned to help, to hold, to fix, let it happen. You believe their survival depends on your sacrifice. But what if that belief is the very thing keeping both of you stuck? Let's challenge a myth here. Helping people always means staying. No. Real help sometimes means stepping back. Real support doesn't destroy the supporter. If showing up for someone constantly makes you smaller, quieter, emptier, that's not love. That's emotional erosion. And it's hard to see it, because the psychic vampire isn't cruel. They're scared. They've learned to cope through connection, by draining anyone who offers warmth. But whether it's conscious or not, the result is the same. You disappear, and they remain dependent. Nobody grows. Nobody heals. Nobody wins. And over time, you stop noticing how far you've drifted from yourself. You no longer know what you feel. your needs get pushed to the background. Your joy becomes a memory. Your identity revolves around keeping them stable. You aren't building a life. You're managing a crisis. And when you try to say no, they crumble. They shut down. They vanish. It's not punishment, it's conditioning. You've been taught to associate your boundaries with abandonment. And so you keep erasing yourself in order to avoid hurting them. But you're not helping. You're enabling. This is where it becomes spiritual. Because to reclaim yourself, you must face the guilt they never say, but always imply. You must choose your vitality over their comfort. And that's terrifying. Especially when you've built your worth on being the strong one, the good one, the healer. But here's the truth. Being needed is not the same as being loved. You can be the reason someone survives, and still not be seen for who you are. And if that's the case, what exactly are you staying for? What makes this dynamic so dangerous is its slowness. It doesn't destroy you all at once. It dissolves you over time. Day by day, piece by piece, you stop showing up for your own life. And the scariest part? You don't even notice it's happening, because you're too busy monitoring someone else's emotions. You've become an emotional caretaker in a one-sided bond. And somewhere in that transaction, your light has gone dim. Not because you failed, but because you've forgotten yourself. Have you ever had someone slowly take over your time, your energy, your identity, and call it love? Tell your story in the comments. Someone else might finally see the truth in theirs. Next, we'll talk about the invisible chains of guilt and why setting boundaries with this kind of person feels like betrayal. What if guilt was never proof of wrongdoing, but a signal that you were finally choosing yourself? That's the mind trap. You say no, and suddenly they go silent. You take space, and they look heartbroken. You stop answering texts right away, and they withdraw. They don't need to say anything. Their discomfort becomes your guilt, not because you've done anything wrong, but because they've made you responsible for their emotional state. And if you've been conditioned to fix, to help, to never disappoint, this quiet punishment feels unbearable. But let's get clear. Boundaries are not betrayal. They're oxygen. And if someone makes you feel guilty for needing oxygen, something's wrong. Many psychic vampires don't act with malice. They act with fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of self-responsibility. And when you draw a boundary, they feel threatened, not by you, but by the idea of having to stand on their own. So they pull away. Not loudly, but just enough to make you chase after them. You end up apologizing, justifying, softening your truth to preserve their comfort. That's the guilt trap. You are managing their feelings instead of honoring your own. And over time, your life becomes a series of emotional negotiations with someone who never actually asked how you feel. Let's break a core belief. If I care, I should always be available. That's false. Availability is not the same as love. Constant access does not equal connection. You are not a lifeline. You are a person with limits, needs, and the right to say, not today. When you internalize their disappointment as your fault, you begin to live reactively. Every choice you make is a preemptive apology. Every boundary is followed by guilt. And in that space, you stop existing for yourself. You start existing for their regulation. You were not born to carry every wounded soul. You were born to live, to feel lightness, to rest. But psychic vampires train you to believe that your rest is a betrayal, that your distance is rejection. And so, you shrink. You stop asking for what you need. You label your discomfort as selfishness. That's the poison of guilt. It doesn't punish you, it convinces you to punish yourself. Jungian psychology teaches that unconscious guilt is often inherited. It's not based in truth, it's based in early conditioning. If you grew up pleasing others to feel safe, you'll feel guilty anytime you choose yourself. That's not ethics, that's programming. And people who thrive on others' energy consciously or not, know how to activate that program. They sigh, they go silent, they act hurt. And you rush in, not because you're guilty, but because you've been trained to react. Recognizing that pattern is the first step toward freedom. Now here's a deeper truth. Sometimes the guilt doesn't come from them. It comes from you, from the part of you that feels unworthy unless you're needed, from the part that fears rejection if you're not helpful. That's the shadow you must face. Because as long as your self-worth is tied to someone else's stability, you'll always be at war with your own limits. And the psychic vampire doesn't need to do anything. You'll sabotage your boundaries all by yourself. The most terrifying realization is this: you are scared to disappoint. But what if your fear of letting someone down is letting you down? What if your silence is protecting their comfort while killing your vitality? You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You don't have to destroy yourself to prove your goodness. That's not love. That's a performance. And you're allowed to stop performing. Have you ever felt like the moment you chose peace, someone else made you feel like the villain? Write it in the comments. This is where we begin to take our lives back. Next, we'll uncover what happens when empathy turns into identity, and how trying to save someone else can make you forget who you are. You don't wake up one day and realize you're gone. It happens slowly, quietly, one small sacrifice at a time. First it's your time, then it's your opinions, then your passions. Then your body feels tired all the time, but you call it stress. And before you even realize it, you've stopped living for yourself. You're managing someone else's emotional survival. That's how the psychic vampire operates. Not with force, but with fusion. You don't just support them. You become their emotional host. And in doing so, you stop being you. Jung called this the danger of identification. When the line between your psyche and another's dissolves, and what remains is a shadow of a self that serves. This dynamic often begins with genuine empathy. You want to help. You want to love well. But when someone doesn't want to grow, your empathy becomes a doorway to codependency. And codependency is not love. It's self-abandonment in disguise. It's when your identity starts forming around another person's needs, crises, and moods. They're anxious. You become their calm. They're lost. You become their direction. They're overwhelmed. You become their container. And somewhere in that equation, you start believing this is your purpose. But here's the truth. When you build your life around someone else's emotional wounds, your soul will eventually collapse under the weight. You used to have a morning routine. Goals, hobbies, friends. But now your schedule revolves around checking in, making sure they're okay, decoding silences, managing their moods. You don't even notice how you've shrunk, because it happened while you were being there. But being there became being nowhere. For yourself, you stopped dreaming, stopped creating, stopped laughing for no reason. Not because you're depressed, but because you've been emotionally hijacked. You've become an emotional support system disguised as a partner, a friend, a lover. And no one can survive in that role for long without losing their essence. Let's confront a harsh truth. If someone requires your constant presence to feel stable, it's not a relationship. It's an emotional dependency. And if their stability comes at the cost of your wholeness, you are not in love. You are in servitude. This is how the psychic vampire feeds, through your silence, your sacrifices, your self-erasure. They're not trying to dominate you. They're trying to survive. But survival at someone else's expense isn't connection. It's consumption. And the more you love them, the more you give. But love that requires you to disappear is not love. It's a slow death masked as devotion. You may say, but I can't just abandon them. And that's the trap. Because you've been conditioned to believe that leaving is cruelty, that reclaiming your time is selfish, that choosing yourself is betrayal. But ask yourself this: what do you need? When was the last time you felt light, creative, free? If you can't answer that, You're not in a relationship. You're in a rescue mission that never ends. And no one wins in that story. You burn out. They stay broken. The cycle continues. Because healing can't be outsourced. It has to come from within. And the moment you start doing the healing work for someone else, you've already abandoned your own. Jung warned that in unconscious bonds, we often take on roles we learned in childhood: the caretaker, the fixer, the emotional sponge. And these roles feel familiar, safe, even. But safety is not the same as freedom. If your identity is built around being the one who absorbs, who fixes, who never leaves, then your inner child is running the show. And that child is scared. Scared of rejection, scared of guilt, scared of not being enough unless they're needed. But your adult self knows better. Your adult self knows that love doesn't ask you to bleed for someone who won't pick up the knife. You are not a sponge. You are not a container. You are not a savior. You are a human being with needs, dreams, and boundaries. And when someone refuses to carry their own emotional weight, it's not your job to lift it for them. It's your job to step back and ask, why am I allowing this? Because that question changes everything. That's when the spell breaks. That's when the illusion of helping crumbles. You don't exist to keep someone else from falling apart. You exist to live fully. And if someone can't walk beside you without pulling you under, it's time to let go. Have you ever given so much that you forgot what your own life was supposed to feel like? Write your truth in the comments. This might be the first time someone else feels seen. Now, let's bring it all together with a raw look at how to reclaim your identity, rebuild your boundaries, and finally step out of the shadows for good. You don't need to prove your worth by staying in pain. You don't have to keep giving until there's nothing left. If any part of this video felt like your story, then maybe it's time to stop surviving for someone else and start living for yourself. That doesn't make you selfish. It makes you conscious. Because once you see the pattern, you can break it. You can choose boundaries without guilt. You can love without losing yourself. You can support others without becoming their emotional oxygen. And that might be the bravest thing you've ever done. So take a breath. Feel your own presence again. Ask yourself, where have I disappeared in the name of love? What would it mean to finally choose peace over performance? And who could you become if you stopped carrying what was never yours? If this video helped you see something clearly, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment. Share your story. You never know who else might be reading it, silently going through the same thing. And if you want to keep learning how to protect your energy, rebuild your sense of self, and find clarity through psychology, philosophy, and inner work, subscribe now and turn on notifications. There's more ahead. And your healing has only just begun.